Good morning, everybody. It's just gone past 10 o'clock, so we will start our meeting, the second formal scrutiny meeting that we've had on the Tuesday, the 24th of June, and it's a real pleasure to be back at Wyvern House. I'm Dan Price. I'm the Police and Crime Commissioner for Cheshire, and firstly I want to explain that I'm not a police officer. I don't tell the police how to do their day job, but I do check on progress and ask how they're delivering against agreed plans and priorities. I was elected in 2024 to be the public's voice in policing across our county. It's my role to make sure that the people of Cheshire are safe, feel safe, and that they have access to the correct justice services, and that victims' voices are heard. You can find out much more about all the different things that my office does by visiting the website, and that you can do that by just Googling Cheshire PCC and you'll find it. One of the important things that I do in my role is to hold the Chief Constable of Cheshire Constabulary to account. That means I have both formal and informal meetings to make sure that the Chief Constable is doing what he says he will do and what the government and the public of Cheshire needs him to do. Today is a formal meeting that is open to the public. More informal meetings are held private weekly. I'd now just like to, for people in the room who have never been here before, introduce that we have Gemma Southern, the Deputy PCC, Damon Taylor, the Chief Executive of my office, and then from the Constabulary we have Chief Constable Mark Roberts, Deputy Chief Constable Chris Armett, Assistant Commissioner Mike Evans, and Paul Woods, who is Head of Planning and Performance. So you're very welcome here. Can I now move the minutes of the previous meeting, which again was held here on the 24th of May as a true record? That's super. Now we'll move into the agenda item 3, our thematic session. Firstly, I will ask about support for victims. Cheshire Constabulary has provided some information before the meeting, which is available on my website. They will summarise this for 5 minutes before I start to ask the Chief Constable questions. Following this, I'll move on to broader questions about some of my other priorities for Cheshire and cover some of the topics that residents across the county raise with me. While this is an opportunity to be transparent, this is not an open forum. I won't be taking any questions from members of the public today. However, anyone is welcome to ask any questions at any time via my office, via email, or on the website. You'll receive a response. The only person asking questions today, though, will be me, and the only person answering questions today will be the Chief Constable. Please also note that this session is being filmed and we will be posting it online at a later date. You'll now see on the presentation my police and crime plan. I promise to support victims. In my role, I commission local services for victims of crime to make sure that there is the highest level of care, respect and support. These are often specialist services that can include counselling, independent support and practical solutions to help people recover. Cheshire Cares is a service I fund and is delivered by the Constabulary. It's offered to everyone regardless of whether a crime has been reported or not. I also jointly fund services which are specialist organisations working across the criminal justice system. Some of those offer restorative justice, work with victims of hate crime and young people who may be at risk of serious violence. Violence against women and girls is a priority for me and the government. This year, we'll be launching a domestic abuse programme in Halton. My aim is to break the cycle of domestic abuse, to reduce reoffending and protect victims and families. When it comes to stalking-related crime, Cheshire Constabulary leads nationally. That's why I'm pleased that my team has secured funding to identify stalking behaviour faster by using AI technology. When used later this year, this will bring justice for victims earlier. This work in domestic abuse and stalking is the first of its kind. I'm determined that Cheshire continues to lead nationally in this space. Learning from victims was one of my election promises. I'm committed to understanding the lived experiences of victims to ensure they receive the care and support they deserve, and of course, justice. Recently, I commissioned a needs assessment for victims of rape and sexual assault. This will be used to make sure that victims' perspectives is at the heart of any services that we commission. It's vitally important that victims of crime in Cheshire have the confidence to come forward to report crimes and that they are taken seriously and treated with dignity and respect. Keeping them engaged and supported not only helps them recover, but it is vital in delivering justice. Can I now invite Chief Constable Mark Roberts, who will be providing an introduction to today's thematic session on support for victims. Over to you, Chief Constable.
Thank you. And thank you for the introduction. I think it'll be clear as I go through our briefing in relation to our approach to victims. There are many things that you've said there that chime with what we are delivering as a constabulary. Protecting victims and delivering justice on their behalf really sits at the heart of everything that we do in terms of policing Cheshire. HMIC have been clear nationally that outcomes for victims are not good enough. When I took over as Chief Constable in 2011, I was determined that that wouldn't any longer be the case in Cheshire. Over the last 4 years, we've seen year-on-year improvements in the proportion of crime in Cheshire that is brought to justice. The outcome rate for overall crime has almost doubled in that period, and we have seen significant improvements in victim-based crime, and in particular offences such as vehicle crime, robbery, and crucially sexual offences and violence. Cheshire has gone from having one of the lowest rates of offences brought to justice in 2021 to the highest in 2023, and we are still one of the best performing forces in the country. I think currently we're second for the overall rate. The proportion of offences where charges are brought has also increased year on year over the period and is currently at 12.7 for victim-based crime compared to less than 8% in 2021. As you have alluded to there, and we share the view, we have placed particular emphasis on some of the most vulnerable victims, such as those subjected to domestic abuse. The proportion of these crimes brought to justice has increased from 13% in 2021 to almost 21% in 2025. And we are constantly receiving national interest in terms of our approach. Only yesterday, the lead for stalking and harassment nationally was visiting our unit to try and identify best practice to be shared nationally. Not only have we significantly increased the number of victims who see their crime brought to justice, we have also improved the number who are safeguarded through protective orders where a prosecution isn't possible. The number of domestic violence protection notices served has increased by almost 200%, from 123 in 2021 to 365 in 2024. And the number of sexual harm prevention orders by more than 70%, from 100 in 2021 to 187 in the year ending March 2025. The number of offenders arrested has increased by almost 40%. That's nearly 6,000 more compared to 2021. And the number of domestic abuse perpetrators arrested has increased by over 80%. That's nearly 4,000 extra arrests. The number of right to know disclosures made under the DVDS scheme has increased by more than 40%, and disclosures under the right to ask scheme have increased by 125% in the last 12 months. The recent HMIC inspection for Cheshire graded the constabulary as outstanding at protecting vulnerable people, making us one of only 2 forces in the country to achieve that grade. In particular, HMIC recognised the constabulary's innovative vulnerability campaigns to upskill officers, staff and partners, and to raise awareness of the community. They also pleasingly reported that all officers and staff understand the constabulary's approach to vulnerability, and they see protecting vulnerable people as everyone's responsibility. We have also focused on improving our compliance with the Victims Code of Practice in the 3 key elements, which is whether a victim contract agreement has been completed, whether a victim's need assessment has been completed, and whether an opportunity to provide a victim personal statement has been provided. This candidly has been something that we've required sustained focus on. It's an improving position in terms of completion. We now have 95% completion of those three key elements, which is an improvement of some 20% from a year ago, but that's one that requires constant focus. And also, of course, in terms of the quality, we dip sample regularly with supervisors and the service improvement team to ensure that officers are fully complying with it. We've recently issued digital contact cards to all officers to ensure that they can pass their details and relevant information about the victim's code, and that again is something that we continue to focus on. It needs to get better, but it is something that we are constantly pushing on. In terms of safeguarding the most vulnerable, the Constabulary's vulnerability and safeguarding teams sit in the force control room and contact vulnerable victims after initial call for service, seeking to reduce harm and offer safeguarding options. Officers in the VAST access the live incidents, so it's as it's happening, which are domestic, sexual or vulnerability related incidents, and contact the victim to make sure they are supported and safeguarded, whether there is a criminal justice outcome or not. Officers consider a wide range of options such as evidence-led prosecutions, the Hollyguard personal safety app, Operation Encompass, and advice and referral to other agencies. The Constabulary's Witness Care Unit supports victims and witnesses through the court process, with 18,000 people currently under their care. 95% of victims are contacted within a day of them being referred to the unit. The support is based on need and can be done at the time of reporting the crime to enable victims to access services at the earliest opportunity. The service includes emotional support, practical support and crime prevention advice, as well as offering an enhanced service for victims of domestic abuse and sexual violence. More than 13,000 victims have been contacted in the last 12 months. The optimum way to support victims of crime is to prevent the crime in the first instance. Crime in Cheshire continues to fall, with overall crime down more than 9% since 2021. That's 8,226 crimes less, which of course is a lot less victims. And victim-based crime is down by 6.5%, which is nearly 4,500 crimes. We prioritise those crimes which cause most harm and have invested significantly in our protecting vulnerable people teams and safeguarding. We have invested in an additional 83 officers in our PVP departments, including 2 extra superintendents, a further 33 child protection DCs and an extra 16 people dealing with our most serious sexual and violent offenders. Through our Designing Out Crime officers and problem-solving teams, we work with local businesses, communities and partners to support crime preventions. These are very varied to cover the vast, diverse nature of criminality that we face. So licensing officers and local beat teams support local businesses. They engage in the nighttime economy to tackle criminality and antisocial behaviour. You'll be well aware of our dedicated rural crime team who work with our rural crime communities to tackle crime and antisocial behaviour, and we absolutely recognise the sense of vulnerability and potential isolation that some of our rural communities can feel. We target offenders committing crime in our rural and remote areas around rural, wildlife, heritage and waste crime. You're well aware and have alluded to the Harm Reduction Unit, which is nationally recognised, and I probably should mention that the Sergeant in there, Dave Thompson, as we know, has been recently recognised with the King's Police Medal, a richly deserved award for Dave, but also that whole team. Our Economic Crime Unit support local officers in fraud investigation and carry out more serious fraud investigations, as well as managing the force's response to banking protocol breaches and recovering assets from criminals under the Proceeds of Crime Act. I would also mention, I think our economic crime officers go above and beyond in terms of supporting those who've been victims of fraud by seeking to act as advocates on their behalf to recover monies for victims from financial institutions. In addition, one last team that I'll mention just in terms of tackling vulnerability and criminality, Commissioner, you'll be aware that we had formed a foreign national offender team. I would emphasise the offender element of that, and we do seek to target those here, often illegally, who may wish to commit serious offences in the community. So hopefully that gives a broad but brief overview of the various things that we have in place to support victims of crime in Cheshire.
It certainly does. Thank you very much, Chief Constable. So I've now got a series of questions relating to the slides that you've provided. So at this point, we'll move into those questions. Can we go to slide 2? Is that already up? Yes, it is. So the slide states that outcomes for victims are not good enough. What is the remedial action that is underway to address concerns of inspections?
Well, as I said at the opening of my update, we fully concur with the view of Andy Cook, Chief HMI, in terms of nationally, the position in terms of outcomes for victims needs to improve. I quoted some of the improvements that we've implemented to ensure that Cheshire is at the forefront of that improvement nationally. We feature at the top end of the charts in relation to key types of crime, and that's pleasing, but still not good enough. We want more. We continually see improvements, and we are in no shape or form going to be complacent about that. In terms of managing the recommendations that come out nationally, we have a very robust process in place, managed by the Deputy Chief Constable, who has regular meetings to hold to account all those people leading key business areas to make sure that we are discharging any recommendations made under HMIC and indeed other inquiries. We place a heavy importance on the recommendations of HMIC, but also other elements that give us feedback as well. So some of the things that are not yet featured in HMIC inquiries, such as the Angelini and Baird inquiries, we adopt those recommendations proactively and put them into that system to ensure that we are making the improvements in advance of when we're formally inspected on them. I think we probably lead nationally in terms of implementation of the Angelini inquiries. Again, I'll look to the Dep who's delivered this for us. One such example would be home visits for people before they join the police. I think to date we're the only force that does that with all our recruits, because we think it's important to start with setting the standards before people even join the constabulary. So I think we're well ahead with those, and that's just probably one example of where we robustly follow up any recommendations, whether they be from HMIC or any other source of inquiry.
I must say that I find that really reassuring that those visits, those home visits do happen, and the police and crime panel has took a real interest in what we're doing as a response to the Angelini inquiry, and actually are hugely impressed by the fact that that has been embedded into everything that we do. All those recommendations have been adopted. So I think there's absolute sort of recognition of that work that we're doing in Cheshire, which is not sadly the case in much of the country, but it's absolutely well needed.
No,
okay.
and I think one of the other benefits that we see from it, it's the opportunity for an experienced either officer or recently retired officer to have a one-to-one conversation with the recruit to give them some of the realities of police work. We're here. You hear stories from around the country about people joining the police not aware that they would have to work nights, see dead bodies, deal with that sort of thing. Not something we particularly see here, but it's an opportunity for someone to have a chat through what the impact will be on an officer, what an impact will be on the officer's family. Yeah. So I think it's a two-way thing that's positive for both parties.
Yeah, I'd agree. The slide also states that the service provided to victims directly affects public confidence. How does the force ensure timely and consistent communications with victims throughout investigation processes, particularly in high-volume crimes like retail theft?
Well, one of the key elements, as I've alluded to, is VCOP, and making sure that we keep victims fully appraised of developments on the crime. There are set things that are required to be done. Supervisors dip sample the crimes. We manage the quality to ensure that people are regularly keeping victims of crime updated. It is a challenge. We expect it to be 100% all the time, but with people on shifts and taking other duties, it's something we need to constantly be on top on. I think one of the big changes that we made 2 years ago now was the introduction of area investigation teams, which you'll be well aware of. We recognised and took feedback from our response officers that managing a crime workload on a 5-block shift pattern when they're abstracted for nights, other duties, didn't lend itself to giving victims of crime the best service, didn't lend itself to them being able to manage prompt and effective investigations. So we took the decision to move to a 4-block shift pattern. The staff actually seem to really enjoy that, so it's good for their well-being. But the benefit for us is that it gave us the ability to develop our investigators at PIP 1 level to deal with the bulk of investigations, to get better outcomes, which we're seeing translated into the national figures, but also to give victims of crime a better service because the working shifts that are more conducive to keep them updated. So I think that was one of the big structural improvements. In addition to that, I've mentioned the contact cards so that officers can ensure that people know who to contact and how to contact. In terms of the read-through from that, I mentioned some of the improvements we've seen and otherwise brought to justice, but charge rates, which I think the public more readily understand. For example, in 2021, we've moved from a charge rate of 8.7% currently 14.7%, and some of the key offences such as domestic abuse, we've moved from 10.5 up to 17.5. So it seems to be working through, but it's something that we need to give continual focus to.
Yeah, I can understand it's an area that is fast evolving as well. And I was with one of our business improvement districts in the county last week who were talking to me about through the challenges that businesses in Northwich are facing. But I must admit, it's really reassuring to see that trajectory of how the charge rate has significantly improved. But of course, that means that keeping people involved in that investigation will also put more pressure on services as well. So, you know, that is the consequence of when you do things well. Inevitably, you also have to have these sort of other functions that keep people updated. Yeah. And that obviously puts more pressure onto those, which can also then make people feel a bit frustrated if it's not responding as fast as they'd like it to be. I think one of the other things is how is the force working with local businesses and the rural communities to build trust and improve reporting to support victims of persistent crimes such as ASB? And you'll understand that this is one of the areas that we get in the Office of Peace and Crime Commission an awful lot of correspondence about. So
in terms of the rural community, I mentioned the dedicated team, the rural crime team. They're obviously key for that. So they work really effectively. We have, as you know, a strong footprint of neighbourhood officers, the beat officers. We maintain a named officer for each of the 122 beats, and it's a key element for them to make sure that they engage with everyone on their patch to make sure they're aware of developments. The beat team's a key element for that. You'll be aware that we engage regularly with the bids. Chester is one example where we regularly engage and take feedback from them about what's going well, maybe not what's going so well. We have our DOCOs, designing out crime officers. I think hopefully with the increase in housing stock in Cheshire, that's going to be a key element for us to make sure that we try and design things in a way that plans crime out right from the word go. So there's a whole range of things, including problem-solving teams, licensing officers that are available on the beat structure to make sure that they make contact with local businesses and provide that crime prevention advice that you allude to.
I mean, we recently had the first ever Designing Out Crime conference in Winsford at police headquarters. No, my office supported the constabulary in helping bring that together. I think I was fortunate enough to be able to be there for part of it and realise having all the planning officers, or certainly a fair amount of planning officers, in police headquarters being presented about designing out crime, and just having that engagement with those key stakeholders was invaluable. And they've never had that before, but it definitely got people thinking differently about the resources that we've got in Cheshire Constabulary to help them in their day jobs to precisely that, design out crime, to prevent the sort of ASB hotspots that you can get with poor planning. So I think it'd be great going forward. I know we've already committed that we're going to try and make this happen going forward, but it's a good example of where the OPCC and the constabulary working together, bringing in the other stakeholders, can sort of do what we've just never done before.
Absolutely. I mean, we really welcome those opportunities, and we recognise this is a two-way conversation. You know, we don't think that we've got all the answers. The ideal for us is if we can co-produce the answers and get a bit of better understanding of what the communities actually need from events such as that, which should be, you know, a useful jumping off point for us to develop our plans and make sure we work with the public to give them what they actually want, not sometimes what we think they might want.
Okay. Can we move to slides 3 and 4, sort of, because they're sort of obviously very, very well over connected here. So the slide shows an increase in positive outcomes and an improved force position, which obviously we all welcome. For the benefit of the public, can you provide an explanation of what offences brought to justice means and why there is a need to use different outcomes?
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned, the one that the public most readily identify will be a charge where someone's charged or summoned and then taken to court. There's a broader range where we finalise crimes. They may be such as things where we've identified an offender but a caution's deemed as an appropriate means of resolving it. It might be one where the offender's died, but there's sufficient evidence to say that they committed the offence. There's a vast range of community resolutions, particularly perhaps with young people. It's not always appropriate to criminalise them, so it might be something more geared towards education, making some sort of remediation to the victim, etc. So there's a broad range where it isn't always just prosecution, but we've solved the crime, we know who's committed it, and some form of action is taken on the back of it.
That's great, and I must admit, I have been impressed to see how we are using sort of out-of-court disposal as well. So I do welcome that, especially when we know that the court system is quite often a really delaying factor. I know the government is putting new funding into courts, I think an extra 300 million a year. So hopefully that will help. But of course, you know, understandably, victims of crime want justice as soon as possible, and if we can find it through other means and that it's something that works for the victim, then I think it makes perfect sense in many occasions.
You know, absolutely. I think you're quite right in terms of removing the pressure from the court system, because the speedier we can get justice, the better all round. I think there are circumstances, as I mentioned, the case particularly of young people, where actually we don't want to criminalise them, because we know that once someone's criminalised, that will potentially lead to a greater chance of re-offending in the future. If we can find a diversionary activity or intervention which deals with the behaviour and stops that behaviour persisting, it's better for the offender, but it's also better for society. If we can stop someone's offending at an early age, then that means we're not in that cycle of the criminal justice system.
And that point about stopping them re-offending, that is, because I think there are some, you know, I think not helped by some press that's sometimes put out, but there is some that believe that there aren't consequences when young people commit a crime, and in actual fact there are. So you know, we're using those tools to hopefully prevent re-offending, but obviously when re-offending happens, you obviously go down other routes to make sure that justice is brought about. I think that's a misconception that sadly is sort of facilitated by some friends in certain outlets, which doesn't do anything for trust and confidence in policing.
Our approach with Cheshire Constabulary is we would always put the victim first. You know, the most important thing is safeguarding that victim and seeking a positive outcome for them. Many cases that will be a charge, but actually taking the broader view of the level of offending, what's the impact on it, what's the harm. If we can take an intervention that means that person won't be a recidivist offender, that's preventing future members of the public being a victim. So in no way, shape or form do we take these things as a soft option. We'll do it when it's the right option for the victim and broader society.
Yeah. And how much do you think these rates could be improved by keeping victims better engaged throughout the investigative process?
Well, it's a key point. The length of wait in the criminal justice system clearly puts pressure on victims. It adds to the stress for victims. And we know, as a matter of fact, that the longer people wait, there's a greater chance of those victims dropping out for understandable reasons. They want to move on with their life. So we will try and expedite it as much as we can. We keep a close grip on where we are in terms of that criminal justice pipeline. So we measure the length of times that crimes are taken. We manage the workloads for officers. But we also provide support for those victims who are in the criminal justice system. So I've referenced the broad offer that we've got here in Cheshire. But in terms of those key crime types around domestic violence, sexual offences, we provide additional support with ISVAs, our domestic violence advocates. We work to support the specialised DA court at Warrington to try and expedite the system, but also provide perhaps a more sympathetic ear to the needs of victims to make sure that we look after them in those particularly sensitive cases.
That's great, thank you. Could we move to slide 6, please? This question relates to the Victims Code. What steps has the force taken to address any gaps regarding victim care, particularly in relation to the Victims Code compliance? I'm especially keen to understand how you will deliver quality as well as compliance.
Well, I think that's a very fair point. I mean, the graph clearly illustrates we are getting better compliance. I think I referenced the figure we've improved from 75% to 95%. So we know that officers and staff are actually completing the requisite steps in a far greater incidence. What we need to make sure is that that's of the right quality as well, and it's not a tick box exercise. So we monitor it on the Power BI app, but we also do the qualitative checks. So supervisors are charged with checking these. The service improvement team dip sample to make sure the quality, where the quality isn't there, we give feedback. This recently featured on force performance, which we have once a month. It deals with the key areas where we need to see improvement or build on strengths. And this is something that we keep coming back to. So we're very alive to driving that compliance. We're in a far better position, but this is an ongoing piece of work, and it's one the command team know I'm keenly interested in and intrusive in terms of making sure that we drive up the quality as well as the quantitative compliance.
And when, because obviously, you know, the HMI inspection is for everybody in policing a really big activity. It takes a long time to get through, a huge amount of resources put into it. But I think it's really fair to say that I go around the county explaining HMI, and most people don't understand who HMIC FRS are. And my often line is, it's the Ofsted of policing, and they sort of straight away get that. What does HMI do in this space to effectively scrutinise what happens in Cheshire?
Well, I've got to say I've been subject to HMIC inspections at senior ranks since probably about 2009. I think the quality of inspection has increased massively. I think the relevance of the inspection increases massively. So there's I can't think of anything that HMIC inspect that we don't recognise the direct correlation to how that improves performance to the public. This is a key part of the victim service assessment, which is part of the inspection regime. In the next round of Peel inspections, which are kicking off now, and we'll run through, that is again probably even greater focus in terms of what level of service the public are getting. So that's front and centre for HMIC. We do put a lot of weight on HMIC, but the purpose of that is it makes it a better service to the public. So we don't just blindly follow what's required to get the good inspection grade. We look at it the other way. If we're doing a really good job, then the grades will follow. So there's a range of things that we look at this. Of course, what HMIC look at is key, but we look at everything that comes into it as well, not just what the inspectorates say.
Okay, that's good. Can we move to slide 7, please? So I've already spoken about Cheshire Cares and the wide range of services that are there for victims, and I'm keen to ensure that these are used effectively. How effectively are frontline officers identifying and referring victims to appropriate support services?
Well, you're well aware of the volume of calls that we get, so the challenge is to make sure that we give that quality of service in every single case. So when an initial call is made to the police, a Thrive risk assessment is undertaken within the force control room to assess the threat, harm, risk, investigative opportunities and any vulnerability that the victim might face. That's then relayed to the officers who are dealing with it, so they attend the scene already armed with that information, as I say, into any particular vulnerabilities. A further safety net in relation to that is the Constabulary's vulnerability and safeguarding team, which again sits within the force control room, and I know you've spoken to them, will monitor that call for service. They will further identify any vulnerability and put things in place to support the attending officer. If there isn't an immediate deployment, the VAS team will again check that instance, see if there is a need for deployment or if there is any additional safeguarding that we may wish to put in place. As I say, that might be protective orders, it might be referrals to other services, it could be something such as the Hollyguard app. The team make good use of the Good Sam application where it's appropriate. That's the system you'll be aware of, that where we can in effect ask the member of the public to give us the link to their mobile phone device, and then we can tap into the video to check they're okay, see what the scenario is, see what the situation is, to make sure that we really are giving them the best possible service. As I say, domestic abuse, sexual offences, vulnerability are all key things where we will take that approach. HMIC, who we've just referenced, identified that as innovative practice nationally. Aside from the specialist resource, it's important that every member of the constabulary who deals with the public is fully sighted on these issues. As a consequence of that, we've undergone significant training across all our frontline officers around vulnerability, specifically to increase knowledge and awareness around things such as Op Encompass, which is where children are in the home and there's a domestic incident. Referrals are made to school to make sure we're looking after the child's interest, child neglect and child sexual exploitation. This is involved the use, as an example, we've used virtual reality headsets because people learn in different ways, and actually you've seen the virtual reality headsets and how impactful they are at putting the member of staff in the mindset of a child and the impact that domestic abuse or drug taking can have on a child, and we found that really impactful with our staff. We can tell there is an impact because of the increase in certain things that fall out from that. So we've seen an increase in the number of vulnerable person assessments completed. That's when our officers flag particular vulnerabilities to other support functions. We've seen a 40% increase in recorded child neglect offences, a 280% increase in recorded child sexual exploitation offences, and a 141% increase in Op Encompass referrals. Now, some of those increases are quite staggering, and they're in really sensitive areas where we need to put our most focus. In some regards, people might have a concern that there is a significant increase in this type of offence. I would counter that and say, no, we're just recognising it. We're not seeing more offences of that type necessarily in the county. We're just being better at identifying it. So children have always been neglected and abused, but I think the fact that we've got officers who are now so much more aware of it, so that when they go and deal with a burglary, they're not just looking at a burglary, they're looking at, is this person vulnerable, is this child vulnerable, and that has seen a significant uptick in the number of that type of referrals that we're now making.
I mean, we've recently had the Citizens' Assembly in both Widnes and Runcorn, and the lead officer one of our chief superintendents, spoke at great length about that transformation work that's gone on from when he first joined policing to where it is today. And I think it definitely won over a lot of members of the public in the room to show how, yes, there were days where incidents would happen and the police would effectively, class it as a domestic or something of that nature. But we are a long way from those days now, and actually the officers are going in and want to understand the circumstances that the children are in. Where are the children? Want to have a conversation with the children, as opposed to just taking for granted that they might be okay because they've been assured by mum or dad or whoever that they're okay. And I think that is a credit to Cheshire Constabulary and other forces that are doing that. But of course, that as a consequence, when you see statistics that child neglect is up over 100% in 1 year in Cheshire, well, is it? Or is it that actually now we're actually getting to the root cause of the problem? And I'm reassured that we are. But I think it can also create data which can be easily skewered. And that bit of context is quite helpful for members of the public to understand why those statistics are going in that direction.
Yeah, I think it's an absolutely fair point, and I welcome the opportunity to provide the context. The reassurance would offer you and the public is that the increase in child neglect offences directly correlates with the fact that we took every frontline officer for a day's training at Crewe and went through this. So there is that direct correlation. It's not coincidental that we've trained everyone to recognise child neglect and we suddenly get a lot more reports of that child neglect. It's that the officers are far more attuned to what they need to look for. And it's important we record these, because if we're not recognising and recording it, then we're not putting any interventions in place to help the child, whether that's with us prosecuting people or in a lot of cases making referral to the appropriate agency so that they can give the child the support that's required. And just indicative of our approach, we'll all be aware of horror stories over the years in various parts of the country about when vulnerable children go missing and some of the things that befall them. So the policy here now is that whenever a child is reported missing from home, they are graded as high risk until there's any factors that mitigate that level of risk. Now, that's not just a box ticked on a form. That means there's different action taken. So if a child's judged as high risk, that means we deploy a lot more asset, a lot more resource, some of it specialist resource, to try and ensure that we get that child back safely as quickly as possible, because we see lots of examples where children who go missing suffer some fairly horrendous crimes. So it's important we recognise it, it's appropriate, it's important that we treat that seriously. We do, not all forces do, and we will throw everything at getting children back as quickly as possible to minimise any threat of harm to them.
And that's hugely welcomed, hugely welcomed. The court process is often very traumatic for victims. How is the force ensuring that victims with additional needs are offered and supported through special measures during investigations and court proceedings?
So I've mentioned the additional support we give to victims of domestic abuse and the victims of sexual assault. We absolutely recognise the impact that's required to support them. I've referenced the harm reduction unit, which you well know is regarded as national best practice. So for those who are victims of stalking and harassment offences, that specialist unit, which benefits from a wide range of partners' involvement, including psychologists, offers that specialist support to people who are going through the CJ process. We've mentioned Cheshire Cares and the Victim Support Service, which we make available to everyone. Mentioned the Domestic Violence Court at Warrington, where we have special dedicated IDVAs and a dedicated officer to work in support of them. As I say, you're well aware of the witness care officers, so I think we really do offer a rounded approach to victims based on their need, in particular those real high harm incidents. I'll just mention again, because it's not one that always comes into the purview in this area of business is around the incredible work our Roads and Crime Unit and Serious Collisions Unit do around people who suffer fatalities of family members and serious injuries on the road network. You'll be aware we've got an extensive road network of motorways and the A roads. We have far more fatalities on the road than we do murders, but the team seek to wrap around people who suffer that to make sure that they're looked after as well, and they're not the forgotten people in the criminal justice system, because their anguish is obviously just as great as anyone when they've lost someone. So it's not something we lose sight of, to look after those people through the various processes as well.
It's a really good reminder. You know, I think most people won't appreciate, you know, people who live in Cheshire won't appreciate the size of the county compared to others. You know, they're geographically speaking bigger than Merseyside and Greater Manchester combined, and as a consequence a lot of roads and a huge amount of traffic coming through, as well as people who are from here commuting to somewhere else within the same county. So you are right, and road safety and the consequence of that is a perennial challenge in this county, I would say, in difference to other areas of the country, just because of that sheer volume of road network and vehicles. So I know I've met the Roads Crime Unit, and they are incredibly diligent public servants. That's what you can see. They take the work that they do incredibly seriously, and I've no doubt the huge toll that must take on them, as they are often dealing with some of the most horrific incidents that for most members of the public, passing on the motorway once would be traumatic enough. These are individuals who do this day in, day out, and whenever are needed are always there on the scene to support everybody in that situation. So it's a really good example as to an area of policing which is often not fully appreciated, but particular officers who often are literally on the sort of the coalface of some of the most difficult circumstances that exist in public life.
Absolutely. I mean, some of the scenes that our people have to deal with are horrific, you know, as bad or worse than the vast majority of murders. If my number one priority is safeguarding the public of Cheshire, which it is and always will be, then following on from that is safeguarding our officers and staff. So I'm pleased that our welfare provision, not just physical welfare, but in terms of recognising the impact that has on our people, to keep them well and head off any negative impacts on them, we're really proactive on. So that means we recognise the impact that dealing with some of these scenes will have on people, that we try and get that provision and support in as an ongoing basis to try and keep them well and in the workplace. So that is something we're acutely aware, and we do target those areas where frankly we'll see the most gruesome and hurtful things, just to look after our people as well.
Yeah. So this sort of brings me now on to my last of the questions related to the thematic session. I spoke earlier about the need to understand a victim's perspective, which is why I commissioned a needs assessment. But how does the force use victim feedback in a very, practical way to inform operational decisions and improve service delivery? And I say that because I think for some victims, they don't feel that their point is being heard. So I do see this as an opportunity to really explain how we do or how we should be taking the victim's perspective very, very serious, and how it will ultimately drive continuous improvement.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we do take the public's feedback really seriously, wherever it comes from. We're here to support the public, so we need to understand their concerns, and if it's impacting on a member of public, it's right that we give it due consideration. So that there's a whole range of means in which we gather that feedback from the public, whether it's the use of force panels, independent advisory groups, the ones that you'll be aware from the OPCC. We survey the public, we take all the feedback, and that goes to a monthly victim satisfaction board where we will consider it, we'll check whether there's any amendments that we need to make. That's chaired by a detective chief superintendent. which I think signals the level of importance that we place on it. We ask for feedback on a monthly basis through our domestic abuse victim satisfaction survey, which is a key one for us. It's obviously a really sensitive thing to speak to victims of domestic abuse. We need to do it sensitively, being minded of the environment they're in and potential risks that can cause. But that's something that we do seek and feedback into our process. We're also looking at a similar survey for victims of stalking. The Domestic Abuse and Rape and Serious Sexual Offences Survivor Group has helped to identify opportunities where we can improve the victim's experience. For example, members work with the court staff and domestic violence advocates to move the location of the victim's room at the court so that the victims don't have to walk past the suspect to get to the courtroom, which is, in hindsight, a very obvious thing, but until you get that feedback and put something in place, it can go amiss. So we work with a number of charities, agencies, our staff networks make links into different, sometimes hard to reach community groups to get their feedback, and then we'll feed that in and obviously take it seriously. And we can't always make the changes that people would like, but at least we'll have the conversation and explain it. But examples such as that, they're very straightforward, and sometimes the most basic changes can make a massive difference to a victim.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I made a promise during the election campaign to learn from victims, and that was based on countless conversations that I'd had with members of the public who didn't feel that as a victim of crime that they had been adequately listened to. Now, of course, that doesn't necessarily happen in a short period of time. That can be over decades of people's interaction with the police, and lots will have changed over that period of time as well. But I think this determination to learn from victims, to use victims' experiences to improve services is obviously in the interests of building that trust and confidence in policing, which is so vital to a functioning criminal justice system in our country. That actually concludes the thematic session and brings us on to the final agenda item, which is Commissioner's Questions. And this is ultimately a reflection of the fact that I regularly have meetings with the public discussing policing issues, and in advance of today's meeting I also give people the opportunity to put forward questions to yourself. The themes raised with me through those regular meetings can be quite varied, it's probably fair to say, and some questions people put forward wouldn't actually be appropriate for this forum, but will be discussed in private in some of our informal meetings that we have. One that I did think was pertinent was in relation to Operation ParkSafe, and I'm interested to know about how this is being managed, as I've had feedback that it's not always been as effective as it should be or it could be for the person reporting. So this is one way we're going to have to hone our approach based on experience and feedback, because it was something that was initially raised by your predecessor. Mm-hmm. It was a scheme that South Yorkshire Police started where members of the public could take a picture or a video and forward it into a portal where people were parking in a dangerous manner. General offences of parking do not fall under the police's remit anymore. You'll be aware that was passed to local authorities, so people parking on double yellow lines and the like is a responsibility for the local authority, not the police. So this was aimed at identifying those where people were driving in a manner that was dangerous, which is something that comes within our purview. So we looked at the scheme in South Yorkshire, we launched it, and I think it's fair to say that we were very much a victim of our success in this. It's worth noting that South Yorkshire have cancelled the scheme just because they couldn't manage the volumes. The current process is that they're all centrally managed by the Roads and Crime Unit, which you would think makes sense. They cannot deal with the volume. So they will identify those where there is a clear danger and it meets that threshold of being something that we appropriately should deal with, and still seek to do that. But we can't deal with the volumes without me coming to you and asking for lots more money to employ lots more people to look at the pictures. So we're just reviewing the system at the moment.
We are going to revise it, potentially to pass ownership to the local policing units where they can appropriately deal with some. We need to manage expectations. We're not going to be able to service all of this demand. Some of it appropriately doesn't sit with us, so we need to think how we communicate that to the public so that we don't build expectation, then disappoint, which is obviously very negative. So we will do it in an iteration that means that we can tackle the most serious ones, but it may well be that we look for local policing to start managing it, because the volume is something that we can't manage, and there is a volume of things that actually shouldn't sit with the police.
I mean, one of the things that I'm curious about with regards to the reporting is how much of it actually is dangerous parking, or how much of it is just more illegal parking on double yellows, and what can we do to actually potentially give local authorities enforcement teams access to some of that, because ultimately the local authorities enforcement schemes often have a bumper year in their initial few years, but then as that actually starts to work, they end up having a service which tends to cost money just to have as an ongoing deterrent. But I'm sure that they would welcome opportunities to administer fines where there are people.
It depends on the nature of the offence. I think it's something we'll certainly look at when we, if we make the move towards the local policing units, to give an option that's referred then to the local authorities who do hold the responsibility. So that's something we can work into a revised process. And we're going to have to think about how we clearly message to the public what is an appropriate thing to send us and what's not. But yeah, we'll explore the option of making the referrals to the local authorities, who I'm sure will be delighted with us. Yeah.
Well, that does conclude today's meeting and Commissioner's questions. So thank you very much, Chief Constable and the senior team around you, at providing the pack and also those answers. I would like to just make one final comment before we close today's meeting. This is actually the last meeting for our Deputy Chief Constable,
you
Chris
beat me to it.
who has had, after 36 years in policing, is entitled to a retirement, much to the frustration of others, myself included. But I would absolutely say that Chris has been, certainly in the short period of time that I've been Commissioner, Chris has been a really helpful officer. He's been an absolute hugely diligent public servant, and has worked incredibly hard to share information, to be as transparent as is possible between our offices, and so I wish him well in his retirement, and who knows, might see you at some event at some point in future. I've become used to going to events as PCC and seeing former officers of the Constabulary, and I've also got used to going to other parts of the country and seeing and being introduced to the former Chief Constable or former Deputy Chief Constable of such and such. So hope to see you again, Chris, because you've got a huge role to continue playing, I hope, in community safety one way or another. And I'm more than happy to, if you want to add any comment, and equally to the Chief Constable, more than happy to open that up.
Yeah, no, absolutely, thank you. I was going to make that point. Obviously, we're going to celebrate, much to his embarrassment, hopefully, the Dep's input, not just for us at Cheshire, but he's had a distinguished career, a long time serving at Merseyside Police, which as a Mancunian was a fair achievement.
As a City fan, it was a challenge.
There you go. He is originally a resident of Cheshire as well. He did some fantastic work, none of which we can discuss, with the Civil Nuclear Constabulary, before I managed to entice him back home to Cheshire. So we've achieved an awful lot in the last 4 years, and an awful lot of that is down to Chris. The public don't see it as much as perhaps they should, but he's a fantastically committed and hard-working individual, as I say, not just for Cheshire, but for UK policing. So we will duly celebrate him over the rest of this week. But thanks for the opportunity just to publicly acknowledge Chris's contribution to the Constabulary.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Well, everybody, that concludes today's meeting. Thank you very much for your time, and safe travels on to wherever you're going to next. Thank you. Okay.